Yes, I am.
So I think we'll start on time, and I assume that Lori may join us shortly. We all set? So I'll call the January 11th meeting of the Orono Town Council to order. The record shows all members are present. I think Lori is now present, so all members are present. Agenda review, are there any modifications in the agenda? There are no changes in the agenda. So we'll move on to approval of the minutes of December 14th, 2020, and I take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
And second. And second. Any corrections, additions, or omissions? Hard to find anything wrong with Nancy's minutes. No changes then, all those in favor? Hey, Con, you gotta shut the door, dear. Should we take a, Nancy, are you with us this evening? Nancy or Sophie?
Nancy is
Yes.
there. Let's
Yes, I'm
try.
here. I was having problems with my audio.
Would you take a vote on the approval of minutes of December 14th, please?
Yes. Councilor Coons?
In favor?
Councilor Osher?
Favor?
Councilor Perry?
In favor?
Councilor Gardner?
In favor?
Councilor Robertson?
In favor.
And Councilor Grenier?
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor, and there were none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Moving on to public hearings. Public hearing A, to consider a vitulers license for Global Montello Corporation, doing business as Alltown, 103 Park Street, Orono. We have some-
Sure. If I may begin, I'd like to, as the director of the Office of Community Development, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our new code enforcement officer. Pat Esty is joining you this evening, and we are very, very fortunate to have been able to get Pat to join us. He comes from the code office in Brewer. He's been here for a little over a month already and is hit the ground running and doing a really great job. He will be joining you in the future to respond to questions that you may have regarding licenses and inspections, on those. So again, welcome Pat to the big kids table.
Thank you, Dave. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick Esty. And I'm glad to be here. I'm proud to be part of Orono.
So do we have any comments on the vitulers license for Global Montello?
So the staff has done all the proper inspections, and we recommend approval.
We have some panelists, so I wonder if anybody has any questions or comments. I see none, so I will close the public hearing. Move on to public hearing B, to consider a vitulers license for DMCP LLC, doing business as Dunkin' Donut, 103 Park Street, Orono. And is that you again, Pat?
Yes, it is. So the staff has completed all inspections for this as well and is recommending approval.
Once again, do we have any comments in the public hearing? I see none. So I'll close the public hearing B and move on to public hearing C, to consider a Class 1A malt, spirituous, and Venus liquor license, special amusement permit for music, dancing, entertainment, and vitulers license for University Academic Suites, 5 College Avenue in Orono.
And same with this one. Staff has completed all inspection and is recommending approval.
Any comments from the public on this license application? I see none. So I'll close public hearing C and move on to public hearing D. To consider ordinance amendments to the Town of Orono's ordinances, Chapter 28, Personnel, Article 5, Benefits, Section 71 through 82, to comply with state law changes related to accrued benefit time. And Sophie, I assume that's you.
You would assume correctly. So as we discussed in committee and I think again in workshop, the intent with this revision is to make minor changes to better reflect what we're actually doing as far as operations. There are some practices that generally accepted protocols and practices are a little bit different than the way the ordinance was originally written, which had caused us to kind of slide into being out of compliance with the ordinance, but in compliance with state and federal law. Most of what we saw were very minor changes. The place that was a major change for us was where we went to implement the new state of Maine earned paid leave law. So in the town of Orono, if you work 20 hours or more, you receive benefits, health insurance, vacation time, sick leave, holiday pay. Those benefits are provided on a pro rata basis. So if you work 20 hours a week, you get half of what a full-time employee would get. When you look at the earned paid leave law, we are more generous than what the law would require. So we don't really need to change anything for our permanent employees that would already be getting this benefit, actually a little bit richer benefit. But what we do need to do is speak to the fact that they're getting the benefit, which is what part of this ordinance does. And it equates the earned paid leave law into their vacation time. So what we're saying is they're earning more vacation time than what the law would require us to give them. And thus, when they use their vacation time, they are using earned paid leave. So we were not required to give them more. We just were required to make it clear where they were getting it. And different towns are doing it differently, talking to the town attorney. Some towns are having the earned paid leave come out of their sick leave. I don't know why we would do that. The liability to the town upon separation is in vacation time. So I would think we would want to, if you're using it like vacation time, we would pull it from vacation time. So the place that we see the difference are employees who don't work for us regularly or work less than 20 hours a week. And in that case, they get to earn, they now will earn an hour of paid time off for every 40 hours that they work. That paid time off goes in its own bank called earned paid leave. If they're sick, we treat it like sick time, meaning you can call if you wake up early in the morning and you're sick, you can't come to work, you call out sick. You can use earned paid leave like that. But you could also use it like vacation time, meaning a week from now, I want to take a vacation and I want to be out for 3 days. In that case, you have to ask for permission. The vacation leave request is considered in the context of the needs of the department, meaning if you already have 4 people out and you can't run a department with that 5th person gone, then you can't take vacation. So it's really managed depending on what the use is, either like sick time or vacation time. We have made it clear in the ordinance that this leave will not be paid upon departure. So the idea is people should be taking their time off when they're as they accrue it. And it also allows us to require it also it also allows us to avail ourselves of all the protections of exempt employees. So, for example, the one that we see that we know will have are seasonal workers. So people who are lifeguards who will work maybe 125 days for us, or in that neighborhood, 130 days. We will be able to exempt them from the accrual of the time. So those are the big changes. I don't know how much in detail you want me to get.
Well, we've discussed this several times and had quite a bit of time to look it over. I guess I'd ask if there are any public comments first, since this is a public hearing. And I don't see any. Any questions or comments from council members? Actually, we're going to have this as a action item on our agenda later on, so I think that might be the time for council comments or questions. So if that is the case, I think we will close public hearing D and move on to public hearing E. And public hearing E is to consider a proposed order entitled Sewer Facilities Upgrade Bond Order. The bond will provide for the issuance of bonds to, or bond or bonds to the Maine Municipal Bond Bank revolving fund program in the amount not to exceed $1 million, with the proceeds of the bond sale to be used for the following purposes: to make improvements to the town's wastewater treatment facilities, including expenditures for capital projects reasonably related thereto, and to fund transaction costs and other expenses related to the identified projects and bond sale. And I think that's back at you again, Sophie.
So it is, and I'm going to try to share my screen.
There you go.
You see it?
Yep.
Okay. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. Avi did a great job getting this ready for us. When I play this, it's going to show you the project area. And here is the pipe. And I think Joe is also on the line and able to talk with us. Are you there, Joe?
He's on, but he might be struggling to unmute.
Okay.
I will see if I can reach out and help.
Yep. So as you can see, there are significant cracks in this pipe. This is all in the Mahaney development, which would be the Frost, Mount View neighborhood. So every time you see cracks like this in a pipe, it's where water can get into the system.
Wow.
Yeah, and when you see offsets like that, that's not great. So Avi was actually able to find some video that shows some infiltration, which that is just water dripping into the system from groundwater, which means that we are treating clean water that is now dirty because it's in our system.
Mm.
the section of the project that goes under the soccer field at the high school is actually so filled with roots that we couldn't get the camera down it. So that will tell us that that pipe is significantly compromised. So you like it when we show you pictures. Whoops. The issue that we have with this system is that the water is significant that's coming in, and it is, Joe would rate this as a highly significant contributor to our combined sewer overflow problem, which is when it gets very, very wet or we have significant rainfall. There's Joe. I don't have to talk for you anymore, Joe.
Oh, maybe you don't. Maybe you do. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, yes, this Mahaney subdivision has been on our radar, or been on our list for a number of years. It's just really come up so that we're together with Public Works now in order to address this whole place. I don't know what else to tell you, because I didn't see most of what went on, but I did help Avi cut that video, so that's kind of showing that we did this in July when it was very dry, and you could see the water still running in then. So I guess it kind of speaks for itself.
I don't think there's a question of the need. This item has been on our CSO master plan for many years. I think Joe, I think it's been on the radar since you have started as superintendent.
It's been on the original CSO master plan.
So Public Works, as part of the $2 million bond that we floated earlier this year, is going to go into this neighborhood this construction season and address the drainage. So it's a very, very wet neighborhood. Drainage and road conditions. And the plan had always been that Joe would do a companion project. At this point, the companion project budget is hovering at about between $935,000 and $950,000. So it's a significant project, but because it's for wastewater, we are able to apply to the Maine Municipal Bond Bank through DEP State Revolving Loan Fund. So the bond bank provides municipalities that don't float their own general obligation bonds an opportunity to kind of come together and do it as a group, and also bonds for other entities. The State Revolving Loan Fund is run with the Department of Environmental Protection, and it is designed to allow for wastewater and water infrastructure improvements with loan forgiveness. I have no idea. We are in the process of putting the application together, which is what this bond order would authorize staff to continue to finalize and submit. But that application will go to DEP. They rate many factors, our financial health, our rates, and they determine whether or not we qualify for loan forgiveness. So while we're asking to borrow up to $1 million, we could borrow $1 million and perhaps get a little bit of loan forgiveness so we don't have to pay the full $1 million back. We won't know that right now. So the numbers that I'm going to give you are based on having to pay back $1 million with a low interest loan That loan, they are estimating an escalating interest rate. It starts at 0.55%. So the interest rate starts lower at the bond bank when your principal is bigger, so that it will keep a smaller interest payment as you go through the life of the loan. That escalating rate is estimated at 0.55% to begin with, all the way up to 2.826%. The average is 1.78%, so pretty good. Under the SRF program, the interest rate is 2% less than the cost, the main bond bank cost. However, it never goes below 1%. So the numbers I'm giving you are based on 0.78%. It could go up to 2. Reasonably, highly unlikely it would go over 2. The payment based on 1.78% starts in the first full year at $67,162. So every year the principal goes down, the interest rate goes up, but the payment goes down by a very small amount every year. So if you adjust your rate schedule for the first year, you'll have plenty of money as long as your ratepayers continue to consume the same amount of, at least the same amount of water. So when we do the math, and we base it on our current consumption numbers, and so when I say current consumption numbers, I'm using FY20 numbers. It is 23, it would require 23 cents added to the rate, the sewer use rate, in order to raise enough money to make the debt payment. If I look at trending consumption, and we've talked a little bit about this during the budget process, that we're seeing less and less use of water, which is how we derive our revenue, is based on what people use for water. If I trend that down another, just keep it going down, we would be looking at about 27 cents on the rate. So reasonably, you would be looking at between 20, I would say between 25 and 30, because we usually don't have a rate that is off. We like zeros and fives, nickels and dimes, as opposed to pennies if possible. So for a minimum user, which would be people living on their own, mostly minimum users, they get billed for 1,200 cubic feet a quarter. The 23-cent increase would increase their, 27-cent increase would increase their annual bill by about $13 a year. So we're not talking about hundreds of dollars. For an average family of 4, which is the number that Joe and I like to stay on, it's an average use 2,200 cubic feet a quarter, ends up being about $24 a year. So what we're asking for is the ability to submit the loan application to the State Revolving Loan Fund. We're asking for loan forgiveness. My assumption is that if we were to be given any, council would want us to gobble it right up and use it. SRF runs on a reimbursement basis. So we have money in Joe's infrastructure reserve that would allow us to pay out upfront cost and then be reimbursed periodically, usually monthly, as construction goes on. And that's how we would intend to run this without interim financing. I don't know if people have any other questions for me.
Any questions from the public? Again, we have an order in regard to this item later in our agenda, I believe. And that'd be an opportunity for council members to ask questions if they have any. I see no public comments. In that case, Sophie, unless you have anything else to add, I'll close public hearing E and move on to acknowledgements by council members. And we'll start with Terry. Do you have any acknowledgements to make?
Yeah, I actually wanted to kind of put out for a little shout out to Rob Yerksa. This past storm, which has probably been what our only storm,
Yep.
it was kind of an odd time, and we all understood that our services were a little strapped. It was going to take a little bit of time. I did get a couple comments to me from individuals within the community about it, and I reached out and relayed it to Rob. But I want Rob to know that in given the situation, the circumstances, just how amazing he and his crew are. And yes, it was a bit of an issue for to deal with that with limited resources. But I just wanted to let him know how amazing they are.
Thank you, Terry. Megan, do you have any comments, acknowledgements?
Yes. So a local business was in the news a few weeks ago, and I just wanted to acknowledge them. Marsh Island Brewing Company teamed up with I think it's the Maine Veterans Project, which is a nonprofit out of Down East Maine that seeks to fill in gaps in services for veterans, because we're a veteran heavy state, but we don't have a lot of resources for veterans in the state. So the two of them have teamed up to put out a special beer that is called Battle Buddies, and proceeds are directly benefiting veterans. That nonprofit also does a lot of work with veteran suicide prevention. So a noble cause, and it's good to see a local business making the news for that reason.
Absolutely. Thank you. Cheryl? Do you have any acknowledgements?
I do actually, and I just want to acknowledge that 2020 is over. I just want to acknowledge that first. And this is our first council meeting, 2021. I would like to thank, publicly, I would like to thank all of the people that are stepped up and are running for council. There's quite a list. There's a lot of qualified and enthusiastic and nice community members that are willing to take on this, and it's actually kind of refreshing to see that many people stepping up, and I want to acknowledge them. I also want to acknowledge the people that signed nomination forms during this COVID. I stood in a lot of driveways this year with a mask and outside, and my pens weren't working because it was winter and all of that fun stuff. So so thank you to people that that kind of stepped outside to sign nomination forms for all of us. And also I also, and this is a it's not a plug, but I want to show you this. This is, and I don't know if where we are in this, but this is From the Mountains to the Sea. It's the historic preservation of the Penobscot River. And this is the River Restoration Project and the book has just come out. It is it's historic, but it's also precedent setting. And Orono is mentioned a lot in this book. We are in the Penobscot watershed, and there are a lot of Orono residents that were part of this. And Bucky Owen, I have a list of some of the people that worked on this project. Dan McCaw is an Orono resident. John, of course, is an Orono resident. And I just, I feel like this is kind of spotlighting this area, and it's a moment when everyone kind of came together. A lot of groups came together and worked on a single project. It took a long time to restore what we use now as our, for recreation, the view. It has brought back the eagles and the fish, and the book is out, and it's very, it's a good reminder, I think, of the area that we live in, and I'm really proud to see it. And it is for sale. I think Roberta Ampersand has some copies. But I really wanted to just kind of put it out there that that it's out, and that Orono is a really awesome place to live, and that the people who live in Orono really feel like they contribute. And I'm very proud to be part of this community. I just wanted to say that real quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Lori, do you have any acknowledgements tonight?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge, as Terry did, how great the crew did in clearing the roads after the big storm. And it's really been lovely weather for cross-country skiing. And we are blessed in our town with the ski trails at the university that are groomed by people there. And then also at Taylor Road and Penobscot Valley Ski Club grooms out there. And it's been really filled with Orono residents enjoying, and also people from elsewhere coming to Orono to enjoy cross-country skiing in our town.
I heard that the Sunday after our storm, there were 42 cars out on the Taylor Road parking lot with people enjoying the cross-country trails.
Yes, the parking lot has been quite full, even on weekdays, but certainly on the weekends.
That's great.
Since the last big snow.
Yeah.
And parking down Taylor Road. So the area right by the trailhead is usually packed, and parking down the road. And of course, the parking over at the university, there's plenty of room there because it's
Right.
quite a big park.
Thank you, Lori. Sam, do you have any acknowledgements?
Oh, this is a little bit after the fact, but just one more time, the holiday season was, all things considered, pretty awesome, and the amount of festive spirit, especially the Riverwalk Trail, which is fantastic, and people are still buzzing about that. We still have lights up around some houses in our neighborhoods, mine aren't on. And I'd like to acknowledge my neighbors who won the contest for the light up the town, although I'm still a little bitter because I think I should have, but that's beside the point. And then also, I did want to acknowledge the impressive number of people that are throwing their hat in the ring for the 3-year term. Our 2-year position. The pool is a little shallow, but well vetted. And also there's on the school board, there are 2 people running for a one slot, and it'll be an interesting March for sure. So, yay, involvement.
Thank you, Sam. I'd just like to add acknowledgement for our department heads in Orono, who in many cases have been working shorthanded recently. And I don't think the public would notice that because the quality of service has continued to be excellent. And in many cases, it meant department heads stepping up and doing their work a little bit differently. And we really appreciate their efforts in that regard. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of David Wiry, who was a longtime Orono resident, had recently moved to South Portland, but was a professor in economics at the university for over 40 years, and a very nice person. Okay, we'll move on to unfinished business. And first item is Order 2101. Isn't that nice to see, an 01 order? Order taking Order 2198 off the table. So I would take a motion on that, please.
So moved.
A second. And I guess, Nancy, we need to do a vote.
Councilor Coons,
Favor?
Councilor Osher,
Favor?
Councilor Perry,
In favor?
Councilor Gardner,
In favor?
Councilor Robertson,
In favor.
and Councilor Grenier.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor, and there were none opposed.
So now we go back to the order 2198 that has now been taken off the table. It's the order approving ordinance amendments to the Town of Orono's ordinances, Chapter 28 Personnel, Article 5 Benefits, Section 71 through 82, to comply with state law changes related to accrued benefits. This is the item that we had a public hearing on just a few minutes ago. So I would take a motion to approve Order 20-198.
Move approval.
In a second, please.
Second.
And now, any further comments from our manager?
I'm all set.
Any comments or questions from council members?
I had a quick question, couple quick questions. Mostly about the potential of carryover, if that is to be a thing. I know the idea is to get people to take the time off that they get, but given that this is one collective pool with perhaps it's vacation, perhaps it's sick time, so some people are going to want to bank some sick time just in case they need it, right? But if there, will they be allowed carryover, or are we going to see people with, let's say, 10 days, a lot of people with 10 days off come middle of December, all of a sudden everyone's gone the last 2 weeks for fear of losing their time off?
We don't do it that way, Sam. We allow people to carry over. Our general policy is you can carry over 2 weeks more
Mhm.
than what you can accrue. Now, your week would be calculated by the week you work. So if you normally work 15 hours a week, then it would be 30 hours.
And people also have to balance, I'm feeling pretty healthy and pretty spry these days, so I'm going to burn through all my time off and then hope that nothing goes wrong the next 3 months in the year.
So
Or whatever.
So when people come to work for us, they begin to accrue time. And that just gets banked until they have to go at least 120 days. It used to be a full 6 months, but the state changed probation to only, that limitation can't be any more than 120 days. After 120 days, they can use it if they wish. We have a lot of people that will sit and bank until they get a little bit there. They just stop accruing. They don't lose it. They just, when they get to the cap, they just don't accrue anymore until they fall below the cap.
That makes sense. We're going through a similar kind of adjustment at where I work with this, and people are trying to figure out how much can they comfortably use as vacation, how much do they want to keep in reserve in case of sick time, that sort of thing. So just a little bit of a calculated thing. So I hope people are pretty savvy to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Cindy.
I was just going to say, and the number of people that will use this provision, very, very, very small. I think right now I've got one person that will qualify.
Sophie, along those same lines, and if as a part-time person, right? And do you have to accrue like 8 hours to take a day off? If I accrued 7 hours, could I take a day off? So, what's a day? What would that mean?
So it all depends. I mean, technically, if somebody is working 20 hours for me and they work 5 4-hour days, a day is 4 hours.
Okay.
I will tell you that with part-time people, there's often also, for many of them that we've used, there's some flexibility. So if somebody is only working 20 hours a week and they want to have a long weekend, before they use paid time off, it would be much more part of our norm to either have them work 4 5-hour days or 1 8-hour day and 3 4-hour days. So most part-time people flex their time and continue to work. If they were going to use earned paid time, they would have to take a day. If they were scheduled to work a day and that was 6 hours, they'd use 6 hours of time. But they would work with their supervisor. I mean, that's the thing. When you're talking about somebody who's working 15 hours a week, that's usually spread over 2 days. And most of the time they want the week off, because if it was just a matter of the days, they'd flex their days.
Thank you.
Helpful?
Yep. Any other questions on this from council members? Are we ready for a vote? Nancy, we'd like to take a vote on order 2198, please.
Okay. Counselor Coons?
In favor?
Counselor Osher?
Favor?
Counselor Perry,
In favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Robertson,
In favor?
Counselor Grenier,
In favor.
and the vote is 6 in favor, and there were none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. We'll leave unfinished business and move on to the consent agenda. And could I have a motion on the consent agenda, please?
So moved?
Is there a second? Thank you. I would like to highlight just a couple of items on it. One of the items, in order approving the warrant for March 9th, 2021 municipal election, and the hours of voting to be 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and the polling place to be the Orono Town Council chambers for all wards in our community. So again, mark on your calendars the 9th, and the hours are 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. I'd also like to mention that we in our consent agenda are proclaiming the month of March as Science Month in the town of Orono, which we have done for a number of years and seems like a nice thing to do. And again, an item on our agenda, which we've heard a little bit about already, is an order confirming the employment contract of Patrick Esty as Code Enforcement Officer for the town of Orono. And that was effective November 30th, 2020 to December 31st, 2023. And we're glad to have Michael with us, Patrick with us, rather. With that, let's have a vote on the consent agenda, please, Nancy.
Counselor Coates,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
In favor?
Counselor Perry,
In favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Robertson,
In favor?
and Counselor Grenier.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor, and there were none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Moving on to new business, we have Order 21-17. And I'm going to ask you to excuse me from reading the entire page. It'll hurt me and it'll hurt your ears as well, but I'll read a little bit of it. Order entitled Sewer Facilities Upgrade Bond Order, authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in the amount not to exceed $1,000.
Correction, you missed a few zeros on that, Tom.
Yes, I did indeed. I thank you. $1 million. So I'm going to start over again just to make sure we're clear. Order entitled Sewer Facilities Upgrade Bond Order, authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $1 million from the state revolving bond fund. And I'll go one more paragraph. It is ordered by the town council of the town of Orono, Maine as follows. The treasurer of the town and the chair of the Orono Town Council be and hereby are authorized to borrow an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $1 million to the Maine Municipal Bond Bank State Revolving Fund Program, including interim financing in anticipation of permanent funding, the proceeds of which shall be used and are hereby appropriated for the following purposes. And then it goes on to describe the purposes exactly as we did in the public hearing. Could we have a motion on this order, please?
Move approval.
And a second.
Second?
And questions or comments from council members on this order? Again, this is the same item that we dealt with in public hearing E.
Sophie, when you were talking about how the payment changes based on the interest rate, is that still considered a fixed rate? Not we won't find ourselves down the road, all of a sudden it changes to a different.
Yep. So the bond bank, it is just, it's very similar to the way our bonds that we floated earlier, late last year were structured, meaning every year has a different coupon. It's got a different rate associated with it, but that rate is set in stone. So when I look at the bond bank's schedule, when they finalize it, it will be an increasing rate over time. However, we'll know exactly what it is before we sign for the note, and it won't change. One difference with the bond bank, as opposed to when we do our own funding, is that we can't refund these bonds. So these are 20-year bonds that we can't go out and refinance later. We are committing to this schedule with these interest rates. Given how low the rates are, I don't think that that's a concern for us at this point. But yes, the interest rates are different every year, but they are known.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, I have a question. It's about the actual pipe itself. Did we see a segment of that pipe, or is the whole thing going to be repaired? And I guess my question is there a chance of finding more damage as the project continues?
Those are great questions, and I'm going to start talking, and Joe's going to let me know if I'm off track. But we just showed you a section of the camera. What our engineer who is creating the budget and the scope of work for this project, they're scoping everything. Anytime you get into a project, is always a risk that what you think you saw when it was uncovered is different when you get in there. This project's going to be a hybrid, Cheryl. So there'll be some of it that we actually dig where Rob is digging. If he's uncovering pipe, we're going to dig it up, and other pieces of it we will line. I think Joe is going to be paying very close attention to the lined section. The key is if a piece of pipe has collapsed to a point where you can't get the lining through, it jeopardizes the whole system. So we are talking about upgrading the entire neighborhood all the way down through to where it would connect into an upgrade that was done from Goodridge. It goes down through I don't know what else to call it, Happy Town, the swale that we have between Asa Adams and the town office.
Yeah.
So this is, I would never say there is no way the cost is going to be higher than what we're suggesting today, because we haven't bid it. We haven't seen construction drawings yet, but we're in the same place we would be with any other construction project. We're not looking at this as a targeted, we'll deal with just a few feet of pipe here and a few feet of pipe over there. I think there's a section of ductile iron that Joe and the engineer are still kind of trying to work through what to do with it, because that's notoriously a pretty stable, long-term piece of infrastructure. So we're just trying to figure out if we want to fix up to it and then after it, or if that will be part of the project.
And I guess my follow-up to that would be, do you see it incurring more cost if it looks like it's going to have more, if it looks like there's more damage than what was originally planned?
I think the more cost comes in if we can't line from the pipe that runs under the soccer field down to to come into this Goodridge Drive, Bennick Road piece of pipe.
Okay.
We are working really hard to not have to dig that, because it's very deep and it's through a heavily used piece of real estate there.
Yeah. Thank you, Sophie.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments?
I just comment that our superintendent has done a stellar job working with our public works director and our engineer to get this ready to withstand DEP scrutiny.
Not surprised. Okay, if there are no other comments, are we ready for a vote? Nancy, I think we're ready for a vote on this order.
Counselor Coates,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
In favor?
Counselor Perry,
In favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Robertson,
Yes, in favor.
Counselor Grenier,
In favor?
and the vote is 6 in favor, and there were none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Moving on to order 21-18. Order authorizing the town manager to purchase a WPCF grit trailer from Scott's Recreation of Herman. The amount of $5,300 with funds drawn from the WPCF Equipment Reserve. Is that you, Sophie, or is that Joe?
Joe's audio is working.
I think I'm here.
Yeah, there you are.
We're replacing a unit that was bought in 2012 that we use up in the headworks to haul. It just sits there and the grit dumps into it. And then we mix it with the sludge and haul it to Juniper Ridge. But this is a purchase that we are just planning on because the other one's really getting tender. It hasn't failed by any means, but it's just we just think it's time to replace it. And I think we can still maybe get a little something out of it to sell it. If you think that's a good idea.
Joe, is the trailer that you want to purchase pretty much a duplicate for the one that we're replacing?
Yeah, it's just a little bit bigger than the one that we have. Just gives us more time. When it gets a lot of rain, we get a lot of grit. So we've had that trailer get too full before. So we think a little larger one would be better.
And I noticed in the information that came to us that we are proposing to purchase from the second lowest bid because of some differences in the trailer from the lowest bidder. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. The one from Scott's has some options that my staff has thought that it's worthwhile. I mean, it's like it's got a built-in battery charger. The hoist is more rugged. The lifting jack is a better quality. So we just figure it's better served for us to spend a little more money.
Can you talk about the sidewalls?
Right, true. The sidewalls are all the lower bid. The sidewalls are a low 14 gauge instead of 16 gauge, or vice. And this one from Scott's, the sidewalls and the floors are all the same, heavier gauge metal.
Hopefully we'll get a little more life out of it.
We haven't done too bad from 2012.
No, that's not bad
Really?
at all. Other questions for Joe on this purchase? If not, Nancy, we'll take a vote on order 2118.
Counselor Perry, could we get a motion and a second for it?
Well, I think we should. Thank you. Motion, please.
Move approval.
In a second.
Second.
Thank you. Now, Nancy.
Okay. Counselor Coons,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
In favor?
Counselor Perry,
In favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Robertson,
In favor.
and Counselor Grenier.
In favor.
And the vote is 6 in favor, and there are none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Moving on to Order 21-19. Order authorizing the town manager to purchase a security access system with video intercom for 3 doors and 4 user stations from Eagle Security Systems of Hamden in the amount of $17,045 with funds drawn from the approved and accepted Center for Tech and Civic Life grant. And I guess that goes to Sophie. Let's do it the right way. Could I have a motion to approve, please, first?
Move approval.
A second?
Second.
Thank you. Now, Sophie.
Actually, it goes to Bell.
Ah,
Hi, everybody. So just as a reminder, the Center for Tech and Civic Life gave a grant to the town of Orono to help with elections. And initially it was for specifically the November 2020 election. And as the grant period kind of wore on, they extended that for any future elections. So when we found out that it could be for any future elections, we wanted to improve the security and access to the building. One of the biggest issues that we have had with the the election and the COVID is that access is, the doors are locked, so somebody has to get up, go open the door for somebody, and then make sure they have an appointment, and then allow them to come into the building. So this access system is for the 2 downstairs doors at the town office and the upstairs door into the council chambers, which is where we hold our elections, other than the November election. So this will allow us to both see people who are requesting access to the building and give them access remotely from a desktop station. And it also improves access for our employees. We're going to have card swipes available. So we'll be able to program each card at a desktop, give them to employees who need access to the town office. If we have a vendor who needs access to the town office, we'd be able to give them that access and then shut it down as soon as their job is done. So this will eliminate a lot of using keys to get into the building, getting up, going to get people, bringing them back in so that they can either register to vote, cast their absentee ballot, all the types of transactions that we have with people face to face for elections.
Bell, I have a question. Is it the intention to, when the pandemic is over and when we're not in an election season, to use this system all the time? Or is this a system that's in place during certain times?
I would expect, and this would be kind of a Sophie to confirm, but I would expect that once it is no longer the pandemic, we would have our doors open for walk-in business as per usual. I find that the access door that people are currently using actually works pretty well if we're able to separate town staff and the public. So there may be some difference in how we arrange traffic, but I think that we would love to have our doors open during regular working hours for just drop-in traffic at, post-pandemic.
But this would be a permanent installation.
Yes.
And it would have the ability to use it down the road, if not that this is going to necessarily happen again, but any sort of situation or after hours or whatever, correct?
Yep. And, we've accommodated after hours appointments occasionally when people are out of the area all during our regular working hours and they need to be able to come in and we happen to be there. And it just gives us that little bit of extra security, knowing who is at the door before we go to the door. And in this case, we wouldn't even need to go to the door.
Is there a recording feature on this? Is this part of the security system on that? No.
Nope, we did not opt for the recording feature. We do have, when we rewired the building for broadband, we did include drops for security cameras. That would be a completely separate system. This is not recording, 24/7 or anything like that. It's only passing a live video feed when somebody is at the door.
Okay, although it is unrelated and not yet here, but I do like the idea of security cameras being set up inside at some point, if that were in the budget, so to speak, because we are in some interesting times.
So I think Belle absolutely spoke to the philosophy here. You know, we want to open back up and be available to folks, but while we are shut down, and we're being told that that's probably going to last for quite a bit of time, even with the vaccine coming on. This allows some greater flexibility and for people not to have to stand out in the freezing cold while we wait to figure out that they're there. But the other piece too is I think the drop box is here to stay. I think the election drop box is something that will stay. With the election drop box comes a requirement that we are taking the ballots out of that 7 days a week with 2 people. So when we were doing that, we would have a volunteer meet a staff person and stand and wait. And now we can, that volunteer, if they pass our security background, then they'll be given a card that turns on and they can use it as they need. And, you know, I think that's a good feature. Right now, when somebody leaves town hall, we are supposed to rekey the doors, which costs us about $600 every time we end up. It's not just the exterior, but they're a lion's share of it. So I think this is a wise way. We've gone through a lot of other ways to facilitate our elections, and I think this is a good long-term support.
One thing I didn't mention was that this grant was $159,000 awarded to the town, including this $17,000. That would leave approximately $58,000 remaining, which we do have a project for that we will be bringing back to you. We hope, if all things work out well. But so this fits well within both the intent of the grant and the allowable funds.
It sounds like a smart upgrade and a good use of the grant funds. I like hearing that it potentially saves money on rekeying the building. And there's another added benefit. I like, of course, that our staff is quick to say, you know, this will be great for the public so they don't have to stand out in the cold. Always thinking out facing to the public. However, I'd also like to point out that this limits staff members from close contact exposure to members of the public. They don't have to go open the door and be, you know, close to the public when they're doing that while we're in a pandemic. So that is a great benefit as well.
Any other comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, Nancy, we'll have a vote on Order 21-19.
Counselor Coons,
In favor?
Counselor Osher,
Favor?
Counselor Perry,
In favor?
Counselor Gardner,
In favor?
Counselor Robertson,
In favor?
Counselor Grenier,
In favor.
and the vote is 6 in favor and there were none opposed.
Thank you, Nancy. Moving on to council committee representative reports. And we'll start with community development. Terry, do you have any report to give us?
I sure do. We met on December 17th, and we had a continued discussion on creating solar energy systems as a land use, discussing small, medium, and large scale solar energy systems. We looked at modifying the wording for the height and removal of systems. So it'd be 100% of after recalculating that. A discussion about the resolution request to support extended producer responsibility, EPR, which we'll be discussing in our workshop. For packaging law as presented by National Resources Council of Maine. We were all in support of the recycling and the resolution to support recycling bill. Community members spoke of this, put their input by a few people. And as I said, we're moving it to a topic here in our workshop. Lastly, Mitch spoke with us from Parks and Recs about winter facilities and programming updates. We were lucky to receive a smaller ice rink, which I'm not really sure when that'll be set up, but it'll be located at the parking lot of the old Camden National Bank. It's a smaller scale that people will be able to use it. I think it's going to be a bit easier to maintain. That's what I have.
Great. Comp Plan Committee. Megan, is there any report from that group?
No, we did not meet this month. We will be meeting, I think it's February 1st at 5 p.m.
Okay, thank you. The Environmental Committee. Any report, Cheryl, from your group?
We met December 15th, and we talked about, we have a new committee member, Anna Stanek, who's also running for council. We talked about the recycling resolution packaging and offered or thought we could offer to introduce language or help with language to take some of the burden off staff if we decide to bring this resolution forward. We have started drafting the charge. We've started drafting the document to help with reduce the environmental footprint. We got a brief update on new possible grant opportunities for EV, or we talked a little bit about EV. I want to say EV. I'm now trying to electric vehicle chargers. We're really starting to dig into where we can do that, and also we also talked a little bit about what it means to have a municipal climate action plan also as a document, but not as a separate document, but working it into what we're putting down, drafting our environmental operational document. So yeah, that was it. Our next meeting is January 28th.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. Lori, there's obviously been some activity at the state legislature. Is there anything that you'd like to report to us, since we have the good fortune of having a representative in our midst?
Yes, well, we were all took our oath of office back in early December 1st. At that time, we made a vote that we would not meet in person. We were meeting at the Civic Center because obviously there's way more than 50 of us. So we still had a lot of people in the Civic Center, but we were spread out, and we took a vote not to meet in the legislature in January. Normally we would have started last week, but instead we're meeting in committees. So my committee is Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, and Jim Dill, who is our senator, is the Senate chair of that committee. And we will actually not start meeting until the third week in January. I put in a few bills. 2 of them are ag-related, and I was very pleased to hear from constituents asking me to put in bills, and the several people from the community that asked me to put in bills. I was the insurance, because those were already bills that were in the last legislature, and other representatives were putting those bills in. And so I will co-sponsor bills that were requested by people, and they had to do with, well, lots of things that constituents here or citizens here in Orono were interested in. So I will keep you posted as we go to committee on those things.
Thank you, Lori. Finally, the Finance and Operations Committee did meet. We reviewed the financial information for the month, and Sophie was pointed out some of the areas that we're watching more carefully, but in general, everything looked okay. We talked about revenue sharing coming in well, which we were pleased with. We also reviewed some of the items that have been taken up on the agenda tonight. Anything else from our group that needs to be said? So we'll move on to future agenda items or areas of concern from council members. Anybody want to express any? Or I guess hearing none, we'll move on to public petitions. I'm not aware that we have any public petitions. And public comments. Do we have any public comments? We do, and I don't know how we recognize those people, so someone's going to have to help me.
I don't know if we have any public comments from the attendees. I have a couple of public comments. And how about while I start this, if other people wish to raise their hand, Belle will cue them up for you, Tom.
Thank you.
First is that over the weekend, people got letters from Vision Governmental Solutions. They kind of looked a little like spam, but they are actual letters. They are giving people the opportunity to call in and learn about their reval and to answer some questions to make sure that the data that they have on their file, that Vision has in the file for the property, is accurate. So if people would please either go online and make an appointment or call and make an appointment, that would be wonderful. The quicker we can get through this portion of the checking, the more information we will have for council in the next couple of months. So we're excited for where we are. Also wanted to let you know that unfortunately the fire department has another individual quarantining, so we are down to 8 members of shift, Rob and Chief Lowe covering. Deputy Chief St. Louis, Chief Lowe. The third thing is I'm sure Rob and the Public Works team will really appreciate how much council supports their efforts and sees their efforts. I just wanted to take just a minute to remind folks that when we go out to respond to a winter weather event, we are using a pretty standard list of priorities. Roads are our first priority because they are our liability. Secondly, we're looking at the sidewalks and parking lots and areas where the snow will gather and cause hazards. The trailheads, while they are a wonderful amenity in our community, are actually one of the last things that Public Works can get to after a storm. So when we're working, and we are right now working down an individual that has been budgeted for, but that we cannot find a qualified person who wants the position at this point. We're getting ready to put it out for a third time. So we are short-staffed this season. So I think the team is doing a great job, but just keep in mind when folks are talking with you that there's a priority. And I think Councillor Gardner says it well, that your perception of of the Public Works Department's abilities or response is completely geared to what you want to do at that moment in time. Do you want to get in your car? Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to be able to ski on a trail? So just want to remind folks, because I am so glad that I'm not in your shoes when you're out walking around and people are talking to you about what their concerns are. And I think you do a great job representing staff, but it's not just about staff's effort. It's also about the list of priorities and how we deploy our limited resources. Also want to let folks know that Candidates Night has been scheduled. You're hearing it first before anybody else. February 4th at 6 p.m. we are going to do a virtual Candidates Night with people who are standing for election to the RSU Board of Directors and Town Council. So it should be very interesting. The ice rink, which somebody already brought up, but Dave Mylan and Mitch are working with Dr. Tozier. I have written the license agreement, and he is just looking at it. We have to have a license agreement in place in order for insurance companies to cover us, which is kind of important. But we're excited and hope to see that soon. And we are ready. We are going to be ready in February to roll out the first step of the Town Gown Diversity and Inclusivity Partnership. So first step is going to be a joint website that will talk about the town and university's commitment to diversity and inclusivity, and give links for people to get where they need to go and find what they need to find. I'm really excited because even with everything that's going on at the university, they continue to make it a priority to come to the table. And we've made a lot of progress on a design for a website, which I will tell you 10 years ago, I can't imagine that we would be able to meet just a couple of times and already have a draft website landing page done. So it speaks to the quality of people at the university and also the level of commitment to working together in a partnership for this. So there we go.
Thank you, Sophie. We are ready now to move on to our workshop. And the first item on our workshop list is council discussion of the Color of Fear documentary. And Megan has graciously agreed to facilitate our discussion on this. I hope everybody's had a chance to see it because it was a very impactful video, I thought.
Yes, so for the public who may or may not be familiar with this documentary, it's a 1994 documentary directed by Lee Mun-Hwa, and it was filmed in 1993, shortly after the riots in Los Angeles, the Rodney King riots, and so there's a highly charged moment in American history grappling with something that has been a long-standing part of American history. So the premise of the documentary is that the director invited a group of racially and ethnically diverse men to spend the weekend at what appears to be his home in a sort of retreat. And for 3 days they film together in a room. And basically they sit in a circle and discuss racism in the United States pretty candidly. And they touch upon topics like white supremacy and privilege. They talk about institutional racism. They talk about internalized racism that's experienced by people of color. And also one of the big things that I think is very interesting, and it comes up a few times in the documentary, is this phrase, the context of whiteness, within which people of color in this country live. And I think one of the things the documentary really illustrates is the ways in which white people are often, where it's that context of whiteness is invisible often to white people in America, or in the United States, I should say. This is a point that's brought up in the documentary. But I guess I have some focusing questions, if that helps for people. But I think that first it would just be really interesting to hear from counselors and from staff who watched the film, what were the big impactful moments for folks in this documentary?
Megan, I don't want to interrupt you, but all right, let's see how I can say this. As we do these discussions, if we have these discussions and other discussions, typically there's some parameters that are set around these discussions, and that there's a way that we ask each other to be respectful of each other's opinions. Is there a way that we could do that first and then go into the discussion as a facilitator? Would you be comfortable setting some kind of parameters?
I mean, yes, I would be
Okay.
comfortable if you would like to do that, Cheryl. I guess my assumption is that we would all be respectful, but I understand why you're saying what you're saying. So if you would like to, I know you have
Well,
some training in this area.
Typically, especially conversations around diversity and sensitive issues, sometimes things come up. We could go around and just have, here's something that I would appreciate, in this discussion. And, being respectful for me is one of them. If anyone else has anything else that they'd like to, before we get into issues that are, these are not policy issues. These can sometimes, evolve into personal situations and things like that. Is that anything that anyone wants to?
I don't feel like I have any certain guidelines that I want to contribute, but I certainly agree that we should be courteous and respectful of each other. And if we feel like anyone is crossing any lines or making us feel uncomfortable, I think we have every right to sort of put ourselves in check, I guess. I don't know. I agree. But I assume that we would anyway be fairly.
Well, I think sometimes these discussions call for something that's pretty concrete.
Sure.
And that, and yes, and sometimes it's, it's just a matter of letting people talk, deep listening, things like that. Those kinds of parameters around these kinds of discussions. I don't think that we need to have these parameters around discussions that we have in council around policy and operations and things like that. But I think these kinds of discussions call for, like now, listening and understanding that some people might have comfort levels that might be breached.
I guess what I would, sorry, go ahead, Terry.
No, I'm saying I have no parameters. I took this thing as I took this as people of color. This is probably what they deal with every day. Should we have parameters? I took this and it really was striking for me. So, I'm not gonna be disrespectful. I never am disrespectful to any of you. And if you have a differing opinion about what you think it meant to you, that's you own that world. So I don't really feel like parameters are a necessity simply because we're just having a simple discussion with being respectful with each other, which we all typically are very respectful with each other. So that's where I'm.
Yeah, I think the documentary itself, and maybe this is a bridge into the discussion of the documentary if no one else has other parameters, but I think that a parameter we could take away from the documentary itself is that we listen to other people's experience with the understanding that we do not understand their experience because we can only understand our own experience. So people may say things that they think or they experience or they feel, and it's not our place to tell them it's unfounded, to quote one of the participants of the documentary, right? So maybe just validating everyone's lived experience.
So no judgment.
So if no one else has a guideline they'd like to offer, I'd like to return to that more of a broad question, and we can see if this takes us somewhere, or as I said, I have some focusing questions if folks feel that that's useful. But what were just some of the things that were impactful to you?
I think there was a lot of defensiveness, especially by think it was Dave, the one of the two white gentlemen there, and and also I was thinking a lot about 1993. I mean, that was when I was finally returning back to college, and I remember at that point thinking I was, pretty savvy and pretty unbiased, but in hindsight, I can look back and say I probably was loaded with bias at the same time. But so, I mean, I like to think that I've evolved quite a bit. I still think I think I have a lot of work to do still. To become more aware moving forward. But it's just like I was really struck by that defensiveness, and I think a lot of people feel like, well, I'm not racist. Of course, I'm not racist, but from their perception, maybe they're not. But it's such a limited thing, and I think that happens a lot when we're not really considering how things are being perceived through other lenses, through other lived experiences and that sort of thing. I don't know if that makes any sense. I was incredibly moved by this. And I was, I hate documentaries from the 90s because they're always so painful, and the wardrobe, is always so hard to see. But I was right from the beginning just so sucked into this. And I was disappointed when it was over, I guess. I don't know. It was amazing. I was incredibly moved by it, and I'm still processing it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It certainly does to me, Sam. I was very moved by it as well. You commented on one of the white gentlemen that was there, and do you remember one of the first comments in the entire video was from the other white gentleman, and his comment was, "I'm a racist, and I've been working on it since 1976." And I thought that was an impressive comment that so many of us who don't think we are really need to work a lot more on it. And the other thing that struck me, one of the other things that struck me is it's consistent with the book that we're reading, that you're either a racist or an anti-racist, and there's not an in-between. And even some of the people of color in this group were saying how badly they felt when they didn't comment on somebody else's racist comment. They didn't stick up for themselves or for others. And I thought that was a pretty impactful statement.
Well, I really appreciate this, that we watched this film and that we all watched it and we're talking about it. And I want to thank Sophie and the library staff for getting it all in one place for us. Because I started by trying to find clips or the video online. So thank you. And I thought it was informative to watch, and painful, as Sam said, to watch that someone who thought they were actively listening wasn't listening. That they were that when told, this is how it feels, my experience as a person of color, to go into a room, to go into a city, to go to a place and feel that it's dangerous for me, and then to be told, well, that's just on you.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really hard part to watch, because it was drawn out in continuously saying, how can I feel like you're meeting me halfway? You're not even listening to my experience and validating it. Then there was that discussion of, can you just hear what this man is saying to you? So, and I think that's it's valuable for all of us to, as Sam said, put ourselves in that position and realize that as much work as we've all done to be more open to people who are different than we are and try to understand the experience of someone, we don't walk in their shoes, and the best thing we can do is be quiet and listen when they're having testimony to share with us.
So I will go next, I guess. So it was really kind of, I kind of went right to the beginning. I read a book I think about 2 months ago, when we were first kind of like trying to read more about our roles and how we changed this. And one of the things I remember, and I don't specifically remember the book, but it said that we were so used to the word racist being a bad thing, that if somebody called you racist, you were probably the most horrible person. when in the reality, when it gets explained to you, being a racist is just a thing that you are, that it's not a bad thing in the sense that you can change and somebody's not going to like go after you for that specifically. It's just a word determining that where you have and what privileges and stuff like that. With this particular segment, I actually was kind of all over the place with a lot of different things going on. There was, listening to people saying like, I'm really educated, yet I'm not afforded things because of an assumption made that I may not be. But as it kind of goes on, the one thing that really sticks out to me was I think it was David, which one was the gentleman that at the very end started crying?
It was Dave.
And it was like through this whole process at the front end, he was very defensive and well, he's like, I'm not this way. I'm not this way. And I think that's why my mind went to, we're so used to it saying when somebody says if they call you as a racist, you immediately go into defense. You don't go into it thinking like, okay, I'm doing something. But by the end of that, it was really, I believe he got it. I believe that he understood when they kept repeatedly asking or keep repeatedly saying that what white privilege is and not knowing it. It's just that it's there and we don't really look at it because it's there. So it was really well done. And I think, and I hope, and I believe one of the gentlemen at the end said that I hope it continues. This dialogue, I hope it changes stuff. So very well done.
I can go next. I had two things that came up for me, and one of them was as a faculty teaching pre-service teachers. I used to do an exercise, and I think you guys can also relate to this too. You don't have to be 19 to relate to this. An exercise where I would put big pieces of paper up on the walls and we would talk about stereotypes, but I'd have my first year students think about all of the groups that they stereotyped in high school. So we had big things. So preppies, there were the stoners, there were the jocks, there were the nerds. There was all these groups that they had, and they were coming from high school. So they were fairly new to it. But I think even when we think about those things, we have these stereotypes that we have in our heads. And I would make them go to the list and write down everything, every kind of detail about, what does a nerd look like? Or what is a stoner? What kind of attitudes do they have? They could do anything that they wanted. And this was just kind of a precursor to, because then we took them all down and everybody laughed. And I was, and they're talking about, all these groups in high school. And then I put up, and then I asked them to give me some ethnic groups and some nationalities and some minority groups. And, and this was where it got, where they had to start thinking about, the stereotypes that they had in their head. And so we had African American, we had Native American, we had Chinese, we had different ethnicities, and they were allowed to tell me what they wanted. But we also had American and just American, right? And this is where the film kind of kicked that memory back in for me. And the stereotypes that they put up, one of the stereotypes that I remember, and it was consistent across many years, was that Americans were white. And they didn't have Black Americans, they didn't have, and we talked about it. We talked about what that meant. And that was something that I something that made me think again when I watched The Color of Fear, was about that, how we do that. And I bet even now you can put in your head what a stoner looks like. So, we have these things that we carry around with us, and they were carrying around, even though none of them were racist, and they all said they weren't racist, they were carrying around these stereotypes, and they could tell that they had these stereotypes. And so we talked about that. We also talked about how stereotypes led to bias, which led to, prejudice and eventually hate crimes. And if it wasn't kind of nipped in the bud. The other thing, and I will stop after this. The other thing is that I would ask my women students, and I would ask them if they knew what it meant when you walked out to a parking lot by yourself, and this is an example of knowing something that somebody else doesn't know happens, and putting your keys between your fingers and walking around with your keys between your fingers just to get to your car. And that was a gender, we talked about gender too. The boys in the class, or the young men in the class, didn't know what that was, had no idea why a woman would walk to her car in the dark in the parking lot with keys between her fingers. And the women, most of my women knew that, and I knew that, and they didn't know that. So there's a reality out there that if you're not living the fear, you don't realize that it even exists. And so it's so anyway, those two questions and that exercise came back to me. It's been a few years since I've taught that class, but it did come back to me. So
Sophie or Josh, did you want to say anything?
Josh, I don't want to step in if you want to say something, or I can.
I always have something to say if you'd like me to.
Going out back.
I will tell you that what I took from that was it sucks that it was 1994 and not a whole lot has changed.
Yeah.
I feel like we're still at the exact same spot. So the other thing that I took from it was I equated it to what I experience here in Orono or in my life. I see inequity. It doesn't have, it has less about color here than it has about just class or status, but I've seen for 20 years inequity, and it's sad every time, and it's hard to, I think I've said this before in a council meeting, you don't want to know what we deal with. So inequity exists. I don't understand how to fix it. I wake up every morning thankful that I'm alive and who I am, because I get it. I've had a blessed life and I am privileged, and I'm aware of it, and I carry that with me every day, and I try to treat people accordingly. But the frustration I have is this is 26 years later and we haven't gotten anywhere, and I don't have the answers. So that's I came away kind of frustrated, I guess.
For me, it was interesting. First, I owe my father-in-law an apology, because I used to think he got a little bit heated at the dinner table when he would talk about race, and Vincent most definitely cured me of that notion. But it is a very personal and emotional reaction, and I think the movie highlighted for me how you can be incredibly well-meaning and well-intended. I mean, David was just beside himself at the thought he was a racist, but he's a racist. And it is really, I don't think we can solve this and change the world until people will look inside themselves and understand that their experience is different than everybody else's. And when folks were talking about being able to drive on a road or be in an area, it is really interesting, because when my mother was alive, she went to Gatlinburg, and it was her most favorite place she visited. She traveled the country extensively. It was her favorite place. And so when we had a chance for a vacation, I researched and looked up crime stats, went on blogs, and determined that I could take my family to Gatlinburg and it would be okay. It would be okay for a white woman and a black man and two mixed race children to walk down the streets in Gatlinburg, and put a lot of effort into it. was excited to get there, and it was a wonderful place. But my word, Carl, my husband didn't tell his family where we were going. He didn't know, but he didn't tell his family where we were going, because as soon as they found out we were in the South, they their his phone just rang constantly, and people were worried about us. So that didn't even register for my family would never have seen that, and for his family it was that would not have been a place he would go. And I so I think we all live things differently, and the mistake that we would make, Josh, is if we tried to think that we could just wave a magic wand and fix it, because we're not living it. And the thing I hear most when I'm around the dinner table is frustration that this has been a plight for a very long time. And now people are coming to the table and trying to tell people how to fix it when they've never lived it.
It's interesting. If I could connect a couple of the comments of things that you guys pointed out, that defensiveness was very interesting. I mean, it was not surprising, but it was very interesting from Dave, one of the white gentlemen, where he was very clearly, I think everybody is equal, and then would immediately follow that with an incredibly ethnocentric or racist remark about, I don't understand why you people don't fix your problems. Like, I think we're all equal. Why don't you think that you're equal to me? You should. I mean, the logic of that is just, it could just put you in a spin. But also it is in several of the gentlemen in this documentary pointed it out. It's white supremacy on display. I mean, that is how it works, is that it is a mechanism that becomes completely invisible to the people who benefit from it. And I think that he was sort of personifying that, in real time in this documentary, which I found really interesting. And I think, one of the questions that came out of this film that struck me, and I don't know if folks thought about it as well and want to speak to it, but this question of, and this kind of touches back to something you said, Cheryl, like, what does it mean to be American? And then side note, like, what does it mean to be white? What is the white experience? This is a question that I think Victor asked several times, like, what does it mean to be white? What is the white experience? And why are white people unwilling to talk about that? Which I thought was really a great question. I mean, not only just in terms of, what is the white experience, or what does it mean to be white to you personally, but then also in a broader cultural context, which I think is sort of relevant to the work that we're trying to do here.
So I think, Meg, for me, it would go back to the defensiveness part of it, I guess, is because we're led to believe that if you even remotely say that you, or somebody implies that you are a racist, that's a really bad thing. When in reality, it really is a thing, a mechanism, or an opportunity to realize and to help change that. Because yeah, as you said, asking somebody to, like, what are you going to do to change it? I get frustrated a lot. I mean, you probably hear me say this a lot about when we do certain things, about, like, everybody's going to advocate for whatever it is. We're going to do something in town and says, hey, yeah, we're going to do this. But I always say, it's not just simply that. We can all put a flag on the side of our house. We can all do these things, but if we're not willing to put into work into the process and be standing behind people to really get to the crux of what's going on, it's just lip service. And I think that that's also what makes people feel really uncomfortable. Somebody to really look into themselves and make a change. And I'm not really sure, like as Josh said, it's been 20 some years or whatever. I just think it's probably because people just don't want to make the change. It's easier to say, I'm not part of the problem. I'm doing what's right, but not really doing what's right. And that's really doing the work. So yeah.
And Terry, can I speak to that too? Because I think what David, when they finally got to day 3 or whatever of the weekend, when they finally got to where he was actually starting to talk about some very deep experiences that he had, abuse came up.
Mm.
And I think, we also don't realize what other people's backgrounds are and where they've learned those behaviors and how they've learned those behaviors. And, sometimes, being quick to judge of another person about their personality or how they approach a problem or how they see things. You don't know where they've come from and you don't know where they've learned those lessons. And I thought that was pretty moving for me to hear him say, I went all the way back to my dad, and this is what my dad taught me. And that brought me back to my grandfather, who was also very racist in Aroostook County. And so I called him on it at a very young age. But anyway, that doesn't mean anything. But I guess back to the point, you don't know where people have come from. And it was really good to see that revelation, I guess, and deep digging. It took a while for him to get to that point. It took a few days for him to get to that point. But we don't get to that point just like that. It's a lot of introspection.
I think there is a short fuse with most people when it comes to defensiveness, where it's like Terry was saying, to be racist. I mean, if someone calls somebody out and saying, "Hey, that's kind of racist," I think immediately a flag goes up. Go, whoa, whoa, whoa! I'm not racist. I'm not. It's like almost immediate, and it's like a lot of times it's like we really need to spend some time. I need to remind myself this a lot about many, many, many things. Seek first to understand, then be understood. Right? To really try to understand where the people are coming from. That credit footnotes to Stephen Covey with 7 Habits, but it's important to do that. Even Cheryl or anyone who's been working as sort of a mediator or has worked with this sort of thing in the past, we still have our own stuff that we're working on too. No one's immune from this here at all. And it's like, and again, it's like like what Josh said. I mean, I'm frustrated. I'm embarrassed that it's still an issue. I'm frustrated that I'm not better at dealing with it, at confronting it. I think I'm pretty clear, and I try to be a bit of a peacemaker. But sometimes you just want to. I don't know. I don't know, but it's incredibly frustrating. I'm really glad we're having this conversation and that we're doing this work now. And even though I am very much a short-termer now, I am going to continue working on this and probably creeping on you guys while you are doing these discussions too. So.
Yeah, it's one of those mechanisms of white supremacy, really, I think that is sort of at the heart of what both of you are getting at, Sam and Terry. And one of the big takeaways for me in this documentary is like, the defensiveness stems from, and, some of you may have read the book White Fragility, and there are a lot of great essays as well written about the topic of white fragility. But there's one of the functions of white supremacy that allows itself to continue or protects itself, I guess, a protection mechanism, is that we have culturally, and by we I mean white people, we have culturally made a connection between the word racist and the images of crosses burning on lawns or other violent forms of racism. And so when you say to someone, you're a racist or that was racist, they immediately take it extremely personally and get very defensive often, because culturally we have made, in terms of semiotics, like that is now the meaning of that word. It has become a sign or a symbol and not the word itself anymore. And one of the things that white people, that's required of us as white people, I think, in terms of getting to this place where can we make change how do we make change, is learning to be comfortable with the discomfort of the truth, which is that we are all racist because, as we'll talk about in the book that we're reading when we talk about it, but we're all racist because we are born and raised within the culture of racism that exists, and so we cannot be outside of that system. The only way that we can be in the system, as Tom was quoting from the book, is racist or anti-racist. You are working to dismantle the behaviors that you've learned, that you've been acculturated to. So I think the defensiveness is interesting, and it's not even just defensiveness. And I think in terms of the context of what we're doing in our journey here as a council, is the discomfort. It may not register as defensiveness for us because we want to do better and be better, but it could still register as discomfort. It might not be comfortable for us to talk about our whiteness or what it means to have privilege, or how we operate in the world, but these are the conversations that that we need to have.
So it's a few people mentioned that there's what we watched was people grappling with their own racism, and had a weekend of deep interacting to get at those things about themselves that perhaps they didn't see, that they would then vow to work on. We as a council, we would strive to make Orono a place that is welcoming to all. And Josh gives us his sad perspective that he doesn't think that much has changed. And I think that change happens with individuals, just as we saw in this video, and with people making an effort. And sometimes they don't know that it's time for them to make an effort, or they feel they're making enough effort, and someone else says, I see a way in which that this is hurtful to me, or that this isn't meeting, that you're trying not to use the pejorative term racist, but there's a way in which the way you're proceeding is not being as open to the experiences of others who are marginalized. And as a town, that's what we want to do. We want to be open to the experience of others so that they do not feel marginalized. And as a town, we have to figure out how to do that. And we are hobbled by our own privilege of not living in a world where when we show up, we have a skin color or something about our appearance makes us look different in the world that we're in. And so but with that great privilege comes the disability of not being able to see it. So one way that the people in this video, this movie, were able to see is by listening from other people who are listening to their experience. And maybe that's something that we could do here, because we are, for this part of Maine, we do have a greater diversity of people, not just diversity of skin color, but of life experience right here in Orono. And maybe by having a community of people that would come and talk to us, or a committee or a group, or maybe a periodic listening sessions, that we might be able to hear how our town is doing, and then try to take action on that and somehow figure out from what we were learning by listening of how we could do better. Because it's hard for us to see since we don't have those same experiences. So, and as far as this experience of whiteness, we all have some background that's, as Cheryl mentioned, there could be a family dynamic that wasn't healthy, right? But whatever, we could have that, or we have a cultural background that we don't talk about or describe, and we have the privilege of having just appearing white. So, and as a Jew, Jews didn't used to be considered white, and we kind of became white people somehow after World War II. And I say somehow, and that's partly by not talking about our Jewishness, because my experience is, as I talk about my Jewishness, and then I had someone, when I mentioned something about being Jewish, say to me, I'd worked with them for about 1.5 years, and I said something that had to do with my Jewish culture, and he said, "You never told me you were Jewish." And I was like, "Oh, I guess I didn't." And he said, "You Jews are so secretive. I knew it." I knew it. I always heard that Jews were secretive. And I was like blown away. I actually started wearing a Jewish star after that because I didn't really want to have that experience ever again. I'm like, if you don't want to be friends with me because I'm a Jew, let's just start out that way. I'll wear the star and then you'll know. And then I don't have to have the disappointment of finding out what an anti-Semite you are. Because I didn't change at all, except that I happened to share some cultural experience in and this was a workplace interaction. So I'd say that one thing that America has done is allows people, and I say like us, meaning all of us, that are appearing white but have cultural differences from each other, whether it's where we were raised or what our life experiences are or what our religion is, or that we don't necessarily share as part of our workplace because we're focusing on work. But we then, if we do, we might bump up against other people's xenophobia that they don't know, that they might be, as Cheryl mentioned, might be packaged from some experience they had as grandchildren. And whether they were aware enough as grandchildren to say, that doesn't sound good to me or not, that packaging stays with us because there's so much about childhood that you're a sponge for information and it may not always be the best. When it pops up later, you might find that wasn't the best piece of information to conserve and then pop out. Anyway, so I go back to what's our role as counselors is to try to make Orono a place that is welcoming and a place where people have the opportunity to check in with themselves and find out if they're being welcoming and how they could do a better job, whether it's welcoming, belonging, not even welcoming. We don't want to say, oh yeah, we welcome you here. We want people to feel like they belong here. And that's a radical concept because it means we have to look in ourselves and find out if we're doing that. And as we saw from this video, you can think you're doing a great job and then have someone say, actually, from my perspective, here's what's missing. So.
Yep.
I think that one of the some of our population, our native population, I had moms ask me to judge the area high schools when the kids come off the island, and which one of these high schools, there's predominantly four high schools, do you think is the least anti-Indian? Not, and it's tough when your 15-year-old is leaving, or your 14-year-old is leaving the island for the first time. And, and I had to think about it, and I had to think about what stories I had heard. This was a year ago. This was several years ago. But this was a regular occurrence. And, and we are in this is our home and this is where we live. We border a nation of people who do not assimilate and will not assimilate because they want to preserve their culture. So it's again one of those, I'm not racist as long as you're like me, as long as you are like me and you act like me and you look like me and you do what I do. So, I wasn't didn't know if I could recommend Orono High School to these mothers, very concerned mothers whose kids are coming off the island. And I didn't know if I could recommend, well, at the time I couldn't. I won't go into the high schools that I knew about, but moms are moms, right? You want the best for your kids and you don't want your children to have to be subject to other children and other families, prejudice and bias when it comes to that. And and they didn't talk about this, but poverty is also an issue. And we have people who live in poverty in this town too. And what those kids have to deal with sometimes in schools is another thing that we have to think about as we are, as we guide the town through policy and values and our value systems. And I think that, it's good to hear about these things. It's good to talk about these things. I don't think it's limited to race necessarily.
I'm glad you mentioned that point, Cheryl, about assimilation. I thought there were a lot of interesting moments that sort of pointed to this idea of an erasure, you know, that there's a sort of a get on board attitude, and that means leaving behind or erasing your identity in order to fit in or to be in, you know, to be American. And I think about that in a lot, especially as a policymaker. You know, we've talked a lot about like what are our blind spots when we're making policy that that covers everyone, but also, you know, in what ways does policy attempt an active erasure to say, well, this is what's the normal expectation for how people should be and what they should want and how their lives are, and there are people who may not fit into that, and you know, and is that a kind of erasure of their identity, you know, which is why this is even more important. Tom, I'm imagining that you're looking at the time because we do have another workshop.
We do.
Were there any last thoughts that folks really wanted to get out there?
Actually, I just had one, Meg. It was if you use as of late, this fits so appropriate, is that BLM, the white nationalist activity, is really active to squash it. So my point is, I just want to make sure that it's always doing the work, because people are going to try to silence people who try to prop.
Thank you, Terry.
Can
Yeah.
you repeat
And
that again? I was unable to hear it because it was lagging.
I was just saying that on social media, they now that
You're breaking up, Terry.
I can sort of speak, I can
Okay.
speak, Terry, because I because I know him so well. I think that what the point Terry is trying to make is just, you know, that when, I think you mentioned Black Lives Matter in there, and that there's this rush in terms of like this white nationalist rush to kind of tamp down that discussion. Like, no, we can't have this discussion about race. And so that we all need to do the work to push back against those things. And actually that's the summation kind of point that I wanted to make here is, I think for me, one of the most compelling moments in that documentary, and it unfortunately, it didn't seem like it went anywhere after that, but one of the most compelling moments was when the people of color in the room turned to the other white man in the room and said, we've given him statistics, we've given him personal stories, we've given him histories, we're laying ourselves bare, and he is not validating our experience. You need to talk to him. You need to not give up, you know, on trying to reach him. It's your responsibility to do that. We can give you our personal stories and our histories all day long, but somebody may not necessarily hear them or validate them. And it's on you as his white brother to even, don't get frustrated and turn away and say he's never going to change. You know, racism is a white person's problem for white people to solve. And so, you know, making sure that as a council, and why we've been so careful in how we've approached all of the work we've been doing these past 8-9 months, is really about making sure that we are not setting ourselves up to be the audience, you know, the blank wall that just says, come here and tell me what your problems are and we'll figure out how we can fix them for you, which is a point that's made several times in that documentary. And I want, you know, I'm so glad that we're doing this work, because it can really, we can be a real conversation when we get there, instead of, you know, just setting ourselves in the position of being the receiver of information. Because as is pointed out in that documentary quite beautifully, we may not be ready to receive it, you know, yet. So I'm glad that we're doing the work to get there. And thank you all for going along on this ride.
I just wanted to thank everybody who's bringing this forward and where we are continuing the work. Also, one last quick question. Sophie, I don't know if this is possible. It looks like we have this on a temporary permission thing. It'd be great if somehow we could get this in a regular collection, and if we had any sort of social justice or any sort of theme section of the library, not to create extra work for anybody, but hey, they don't have any people walking in these days. I'm joking. That was a joke. That was a joke. But it's like it would be nice to have this sort of thing available all the time, not just for us, but for the full community.
So I can look to that, Sam. I will tell you that we have to look at format and the cost. We're buying not just the video, but the license to be able to repeatedly use it. So I will talk to Lori about that. But the other thing to keep in mind is every time you ask me to buy a book, so Terry asked for a book. I bought one for Terry, one for staff, so we can try to keep up with you. And one that sits here that another counselor can use. When we're done, those will go to the library, is the deal I have with Lori. You're paying for them. She's doing all the work, and they will benefit the library at the end of the day.
We're very thankful for the work she's doing.
I'd like to thank all of you for participating in this discussion, and especially thank Megan for being willing to facilitate it for us. You did a great job, and thanks again. I think that we have the book that we are moving through. Some of us are moving through at least, and we were hoping that we could discuss that book at our February meeting. So I hope that everybody has obtained it by now. And if not, maybe you can get it soon, and hopefully we can discuss it at our February meeting.
I don't have the book, and I'm reading something different. I could get it, I suppose, and read 2 books at the same time.
Maybe you
I
could.
am capable. It's been a while.
Just so I make sure I'm keeping up with you, it's Me and White Supremacy. Is that the one that we're reading?
No.
What are we reading?
How to be an anti-racist.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. I'm reading it. I'm reading The Rise of Environmental Justice, actually, which is actually pretty good too. So
Riveting.
yeah, it's riveting. I know. I read with a highlighter.
Well, if people are able to hang in there for a little bit longer, we'd like to move on to the council resolution supporting extended producer responsibility for packaging. And I'm thinking this is probably not going to take very long. We received some material in our packet. Cheryl, is that something you'd like to?
Yeah, I didn't want it to take too long. I'm trying to go by the process that we adopted as far as getting it to committee. We took it to community development and then to workshop. And I'd like to try to get it moved to our next council meeting, if possible. I think we talked about this last year, and it's just a recycling. It's a recycling resolution, just to protect our recycling program, basically. And in the if it passes, I mean, it's a legislative action. If it passes in the legislature this year, Orono will be on the list to receive a revenue, municipal funding for our waste disposal. And so I really, and Sophie graciously let me stick it on the workshop agenda, so I didn't have to wait until, or we didn't have to wait until next meeting or next council meeting, which would have brought it to March if we waited until February for workshop. So I'm just asking that we move it to council for a vote for, and that's all I need tonight, if that's possible.
Any questions for Cheryl or comments on this item? We discussed it in committee, as Cheryl mentioned. There's going to be some a crafting of language, I would assume,
Yes.
Cheryl, between now and in our February meeting.
Yeah, and I have examples too, and the Environment Committee has offered to do that language if necessary, and if, just to take the, I don't want staff to have to go through it, or however we want to do it. It's pretty cut and dry, and I have examples from other communities who have signed on and passed their resolution.
We all set to move this to a council meeting in February?
Yes, I
we
think
are.
that this is something that our residents would be very, very interested
Yep.
in us discussing.
Thank you.
So unless there are any other questions or comments, we will say that we've had it in workshop, we've discussed it in committee, and now we're ready to move it to a regular meeting in February.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yep. So if there is no other business for the group, the next item on the agenda is adjournment.
Motion
Are
to
we all
adjourn.
set with adjournment?
So moved.
Great. Let's have a
Do we need to
second.
second it? Second.
Oh, go ahead. All in favor, you can just wave. All right, thank you all very much for a nice meeting.
Thank you all.
When's our next meeting, Sophie?
The next meeting is next Thursday. We have Community Development Committee. And then the Monday after that, we have Finance and Operations. I am going to be trying to take Friday off, so I would have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off. But if you need me, you know how to reach me.
You do indeed. Okay.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care.
Take care. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Thursdays and.
Yep.
Wait a minute.